Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm on today with Tony. Goes by Hackenslash. He's on Twitter. Link to his blogs in the description below. And we're probably going to cover a range of topics today. So Tony, you asked me about acceptance of evolution here in Louisiana.
Indeed.
And so the acceptance of evolution in Louisiana, I think, is higher than most people live in Louisiana would think, or at least in the Bible Belt would think. Yes, there are a lot of creationists. They come around here at LSU and they yell at us from the sidewalks, and you and I actually had the displeasure of talking to one on Facebook. That was the good old Charlie.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty clear. It was pretty clear from that discussion that his entire line of argumentation comes straight out of the Site and Bruggencate playbook, and I suspect he doesn't understand most of the arguments he's making. Hence, he doesn't really understand the objections to them. Although Site and Bruggencate doesn't either. He's an idiot.
Hey, as long as you have that intro to logic, chapter 1, that's all that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, these guys, there's not just one, there are several of them that come around here, and they're all presuppositional apologists. None of them are like natural theologians, although there is one who I like him. He's a nice guy. But for the most part, they're presuppositional apologists, and you're right, they're all repeating the same quotes, the same arguments. You can't talk about evidence unless you have a standard of truth, and you can't have a standard of truth without God.
Yeah.
I guarantee every single one of them makes that same argument.
Yeah, and it's complete nonsense as well because the argument falls on its own basis. I did write a complete article about presuppositionalism, and to be honest, I could have debunked presuppositionalism in 3 lines, but you kind of, you have to, once you've drawn your readers in, you have to give them something to read, and that's the only reason it was so long. Because it's complete nonsense. It falls on its own basis. It's subject to all its own objections. Yeah,
I agree. I like the Euthyphro dilemma, the Euthyphro dilemma, however you pronounce it.
Yeah,
I like that one. There was a group of apologists called Truth on Display who came here with this huge banner that they put out in front of the union, which was really funny because one of the workers or one of the head office people from the union came out and said, "You can't have big signs like this out front."
Right.
So they half lowered it. They half lowered it, and then they just kind of left it up. Right. I don't know if they really cared or what, but we talked with them, and I brought up the Euthyphro dilemma, and the guy just harumphed it off. He said, "Oh, it doesn't matter." It didn't really.
Yeah. No.
Explain. I have an echo. Am I echoing on your end?
No.
Ooh,
is it on the YouTube stream you're echoing?
Hello. I have an echo. Am I echoing on your end?
Oh, I am now. No. You are now.
I am.
On the YouTube stream you're echoing.
Hello. Okay.
Have you muted the YouTube stream?
Yep. Oh wait, I don't hear it now. It's gone.
There you go.
Okay. All right. Okay. So yeah, these guys. He just brushed off the Euthyphro, I think it is, dilemma without ever explaining why.
Yeah. And it's pretty par for the course, to be honest, because if you don't understand an argument, all you can really do is hand wave it, and I think that's really the frustrating thing for those of us who actually spend some time thinking carefully about what the foundation of these arguments is.
What foundation?
Well, I mean, the Euthyphro dilemma is a foundational argument, and when you spend some time thinking about sort of the foundations of logic and what's important about how we think about things, it's really frustrating to just have them batted away. And I think that's the problem that most counter apologists have with presuppositional apologetics, is simply that it's incredibly frustrating, because all they've really got is no, because you can't justify that. And
I'm right because I'm right because I'm right.
Yeah, because I assert myself to be right. It's the extreme circularity. It's the Ouroboros of arguments, isn't it?
Yeah, the I'm not really good with philosophy, though. I enjoyed reading a bit about philosophy in high school, especially my senior year. I even read Nietzsche's book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which was a very intriguing book. Very... Ooh. It was loud.
He's playing head.
Oh, you have it? Oh, he has it. Holy crap. We have it right here. Have you read all of it?
No.
Oh, it's very bizarre, especially the chapter with like the guy who has the snake in his throat. And yeah, weird book. But
I threw it at the wall in disgust a few pages in. I couldn't be bothered with it, to be honest. I've not. I've gone to great lengths in some places to talk about how philosophy is taught and the view that people have of philosophy. And it's clear from talking to some that the view they have of philosophy is that knowing a lot of ISBN numbers constitutes doing philosophy. You know, sorry, the Dewey Decimal System is not a philosophical tract. Knowing what other people have said is not doing philosophy. Philosophy is about making sure that we're asking the right kinds of question. That's really all it's about. Philosophy is the art of asking the right question. That's all it is. But you come across people. I mean, I'm sure you've come across the likes of Eve Kaninen, who
yeah, unfortunately, I ran across her once. Do it?
Yeah, and she's absolutely clueless. Because she's one of these people who's been to university, studied philosophy, but because of the way philosophy is taught, it's more like a history of what people have thought. But because of the way it's taught, people think that knowing what people have said in the past is doing philosophy, and it just isn't. There's a reason we talk about the philosophers of the past. You know, I have a favorite go-to example about philosophers, and it's from Aristotle, because Aristotle famously conjectured, with no justification whatsoever, that women have fewer teeth than men. And he reasoned his way to this conclusion and wouldn't be swayed from it. And of course, he could have resolved it by the simple expedient of asking the first passing bint to open a gob and counting. But measurement was the work of artisans, and therefore entirely beneath a man of his intellect. And this is my go-to when people talk about first cause arguments, because of course Aristotle was the source of the four fundamental causes. And therefore the source of all first cause arguments. And as soon as you point out this, that in today's world, in light of modern physics, especially quantum theory, that Aristotle has about as much relevance to sort of talk of cosmology as he does on sexual dimorphism in human dentition. You know, it's
yeah, it's when I took philosophy in senior year, my favorite story was it wasn't Aristotle. It was a guy who talked to Plato, and Plato was all about the forms, the idea of the forms,
the ideal forms.
And he said, and so he says, he has this cup, and he says this cup is like a representation of cupness, which exists in abstract space or whatever it was. And there was a guy in the audience who was like a philosopher or something. I can't remember his name, but so he looks in the cup and he says, "Where is the perfect form of emptiness, or the perfect representation of emptiness?" And he taps Plato on the head and says, "It's up here."
Yeah. It's perfect. And again, You know,
Yeah.
a modern mathematician, somebody who studies topology, would have an absolute field day. People bang on about Plato and Aristotle. There's a reason that we still talk about them, because they're good examples of what we used to think in the past, and what we learn from them is how much thinking has improved, not how good their thinking was. It was good for the time. It was cutting edge stuff 2,500 years ago, but of very little relevance now in real terms, except to teach us how not to do it.
Yeah. Eve Kaninen, you mentioned her. I ran into, I think actually like maybe twice. I did run into a video of hers in some way or another. I don't know how I ran into it, but I did. She posted it. Was these two little guys who I think were supposed to be like stereotypical Irish guys, and they're talking to Richard Dawkins, and of course everything he says is just a straw man. You know,
right, yeah.
Nothing he said was anything remotely like what he would actually say in this context. But hey, who needs to know what he's actually saying when you're just trying to get people to join your side at the very end? And I thought, okay, maybe this is just, bad theism, which I guess would be redundant. But at the very end of the video, it gets worse. They say, Richard Dawkins tells them, name one belief I hold by faith alone, and they say evolution. And I thought, are you kidding? Really? So not only are they, presuppositionalists misrepresenting Dawkins, they're also, creationists, of course. And so,
yeah.
So I commented on it under the video, and she never responded to me. I don't know if she's blocked me, or I don't think so, but that's what happened.
Yeah. She probably did, or she muted you because she knows that people find that frustrating.
Oh, hey, Paul says he has seen it. Eric Coven used it in one of his TV shows. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, we've got quite a few people in here now. Hello. Yeah, to get back to acceptance of evolution down here, I think in a college setting, I think the acceptance is pretty high, mostly because a lot of the people here have studied it at some point in their lives. They've come across it at some point. Although Savannah has had or has people in her biology class who are creationists, which is kind of funny, I think, because I have not ever come across that in my biology classes.
Right.
But that's life, I guess. Yeah. Oh, Donald and Connell meet Richard Dawkins. Yeah, that's what it is. Thanks, Paul.
Right, I'll have to go and have a look at it. So it's Eve Kaninen video, is it?
Yeah, I don't know if she made it or just copied it from YouTube. You can probably look it up on YouTube. But yeah, so I think acceptance around this area is pretty high, but among adults, I think a lot of adults in general in Louisiana do not, and that is reflected in our legislation, as I mentioned with the 2008 Louisiana Science Education Act, or 2009, whichever one. I think that even those who are non-theists don't have an interest in the subject anyway. Yeah, and a lot of people, as Savannah's pointed out, don't have an interest in it anyways.
Yeah.
And so if someone comes up to them arguing about evolution, they're not going to have the knowledge to say, well, what you're saying is wrong,
Yeah. And that's, I mean, to be honest, I really only started learning about evolution because I kind of fell into counter apologetics at some point, and nobody wanted to discuss cosmology at the time. I mean, everyone thinks they can do it now because William Lane Craig has been out and done the. He's made the cosmological arguments popular again. But when I first fell into counter-apologetics, and of course physics is my area of interest, and I'd kind of read a couple of Dawkins books, just by chance. The Selfish Gene fell off the bookshelf at the library for me at one point, and I didn't really know anything about evolution. I kind of had a very, very basic grasp of the the mechanisms. But now I realize how little I knew because of how much I know about it now, and how much we've actually observed and what the details of the mechanisms are. But it was purely by accident that I learned anything about it at all.
Yeah, I read the Selfish Gene only a few months ago. Well, no, it was like last fall. Now that I think about it, so it was about a year ago, and I thought it was a pretty interesting book. It's pretty long and deep, but I still thought it was pretty good. Of course, Origin of Species was too. It was a very thick book that was pretty dry.
Well, funnily enough, I only read that last year for the first time.
Yeah, it's a good book though. I felt a sense of awe in reading it, just having this book and being able to read what the father of modern biology thought and believed, and so it just is very, very interesting to know that insight.
Some of what he said, and it was complete bollocks, of course.
Yes, yeah, like the thing about dogs, he thought different breeds of like house dogs were descended from different species of like wolves or coyotes or jackals, which is no. There was a book someone wrote about that concept a number of years after Origin came out, where he was basically arguing for that concept just by the outward characteristics of dogs, saying, "Oh, this one looks kind of like a jackal, so yeah, that one must be related to jackals." And so it was there was also the idea of the pangenesis, which was completely wrong.
Yeah, we
don't have little like Matryoshka dolls in our sperm.
No. No, but I mean, to be honest, I think that once you grasp evolution, it's Huxley put it perfectly. How extremely stupid of me not to have thought of that. In fact, if you I mean, the atheism was 160 years ago. Forget it. So the extant paradigm was the one that pretty much everyone accepted. The church had enjoyed the hegemony for 2,000 years, and so it wasn't something that was going to be challenged in any real way. However, once you get it, it's really straightforward, and it pains me when I see how badly people understand it. Actually, there's a really good question. It's one that I keep kind of asking in different contexts and never really follow it up because it's if you had one thing that is wrong in the popular conception of something that you would correct, what is it? And I think I'm thinking more in terms of people on our side of the fence as well, rather than the counters. So if what would you correct that you see counter apologists do all the time? What mistakes would you correct?
I would have them actually read the works they're talking about. I think if they actually picked up the books that they berate or claim to berate, I think it would dispel a lot of their ideas about these things. If we could get them to just pick up the Selfish Gene or just pick up Origin of Species and see, no, this is what it actually says. Darwin's not actually saying the evolution of the eye can't be explained. Dawkins isn't saying we all have to be completely selfish, that there's no such thing as altruism.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's kind of the creationist argument, isn't it? I'm thinking more specifically on our side. I mean, I've picked up on the Dawkins one myself because I did a post actually, and it was about books. It was actually a polemic against holy books, but it was about books, and in part of what I was talking about was in the selfish gene, how there's a problem with books in that. Not in books that have been read, but in books that haven't been read and that have been assessed on the title alone. And in The Selfish Gene, for example, there is a chapter entitled "You Scratch My Back, I'll Ride on Yours," and it's all about reciprocal altruism. How can you possibly come away from that book thinking that he's saying that evolution is selfish? He's saying exactly the opposite for almost for the entire book.
Yeah, for like at least half the book, he's just explaining, how altruism could arise through even with these selfish genes, and so.
Yeah, but I was thinking really specifically of popular mistakes that counter apologists make in dealing with creationists. Is there anything that you see that just makes you want to blow up at them, say, no, don't do that. That's a terrible argument.
There's a lot of stuff. I gotta be honest. There's just so much crap that I know everyone who promotes science and rationality and has to deal with these morons. There are just so many topics we all come across where we just have to go like this. We've explained this 100 times, and so for me, I think stuff like transitional fossils, I think there's just a categorical misunderstanding of the terms involved when they make those arguments.
Yeah.
They're coming.
Yeah, I think atheists make some of those mistakes as well, though, and they don't help the case. And because they point to Tiktaalik and Archaeopteryx. Well, okay, fair enough. In the classical sense, they are transitional fossils. But what's not understood by the counter apologists in a lot of these situations is that every single bloody organism is a transition. The whole process is a transition. It's nothing but transition.
That's why we have such difficult times trying to figure out what a species is, or when there's a new species. The reason is alleles are varying in populations every generation. It's inevitable. So it's difficult. Okay, is this one species? Is this another species? Are these guys interbreeding anymore? Are they separated? It's just, it's difficult. And they think oh no, we can just slap a label on it and it's all new, brand new, good stuff.
But unfortunately, nature doesn't like to be put in boxes.
Exactly.
We like to classify things.
Karis is saying the second law of thermodynamics, which Charlie, our good friend Charlie, is actually returning to that.
Is he?
Yeah, he put it to me yesterday. Although he still has avoided my charge to him, which was he brought up that crap about how, we're two sides of the same coin. We're all looking at the same evidence here. That is palpably, demonstrably false.
Yeah,
we are not.
It's known as the interpretations canard. Yeah, there's one interpretation that matters, and that's the one that makes accurate predictions about what we'll observe in the future and conforms to observation. The only interpretation that matters. We don't care about any other one.
Yeah. So I said to him, okay, you think this is just a matter of interpretation? We'll have to explain this. And I posted this long list of explanations dealing with one very specific area of biology, just the fish to tetrapod transition.
Right.
And I put to him all these different ways we know fish relate to tetrapods. I said, explain all of these in the context of the creation model. And then I will consider your side. Nothing. Because he has nothing.
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't even recognize what we're talking about half the time. He ignores most of the points we make, focuses on a small slice of all the points we make.
Yeah.
And then declares victory.
That's pretty much what they all do. I mean, as you know, I have written a fair bit about an awful lot of topics related to science and logic and various other bits and pieces. And what I've found is that when I direct deniers to them, I can predict with absolute certainty what their first comeback will be, because they will only read us until they can find something that they think they can disagree with and erect an argument against. And they come back within 3 or 4 minutes in something that would take me 15 or 20 minutes to read. And that's as a very quick reader and having written it, knowing exactly what's in it.
Yeah, I think that's why it's important to preempt their arguments. We're going to say, okay, it's like we make our argument, then we say, you can't go this way. You can't take this little door out because of this reason. And then that kind of stumps them.
I think that's a mistake, if I'm honest.
Okay.
I think that's a mistake. And interestingly, Matt Dillahunty made a similar point not long ago.
Okay.
That if you try to preempt their arguments, what you'll actually find is that you're not listening to them properly, and you'll miss opportunities to really kill their arguments.
Yeah, that's fair.
Because you've got an expectation about how the discussion's going to go, and you will immediately you'll gear yourself for that discussion, and they can throw you a curveball and you don't even notice that it's been thrown, and you can lose an argument that way.
That's fair. That's a very fair point.
You'll tend not to if you've got half a clue about you. You'll even if you miss a point, if it gets brought up again, because that's really the only way it can work. If it gets brought up again, you'll get a chance to address it. But the problem is that you've given them ground then, and I'm really careful about not giving ground wherever I can. I'll challenge every word,
Yeah.
But you really need to focus on the arguments they're making, because and it's something that because they do it as well, and I find it really frustrating. And I even say to them, what are you doing? Why do you want to have a discussion with the Hackenslash in your head or the Hackenslash that's on the screen in front of you? It's up to you, but you'll find that you'll have a much more productive discussion with me than you will with the fabrication of me that's in your head. And I think it's really easy to fall into the trap of not listening to the discussion, not listening to what their arguments are. And I think we need to address their arguments, because, to be honest, I've said this before, and I don't know what your view on this is, but to be honest, I don't discuss. I'm not even talking to the denier. I'm not even talking to them. Well, I'm using their arguments as springboards to have a discussion with the peanut gallery. It's the people sitting on the fence, the onlookers, and the people who aren't decided, and the people who are looking for. I just want to make sure their arguments don't go unchallenged, which means you have to challenge every argument, and you've got to pay attention to them for that.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's what I've heard from other people who have debates with theists. They're saying, don't go in expecting to change their minds. Go in expecting to show the audience what's wrong with this argument, which I think is a very fair point.
Yeah. My personal one, actually, I've got loads of them, and you'll occasionally see me post something that I call a public service announcement. Generally speaking, when I post a public service announcement, it's because yet again I've seen somebody on my side of the fence make an argument that gives too much ground or doesn't smack the argument down as comprehensively as it needs to be smacked down. For example, and I did one a while back about the burden of proof, because even people who have a really good grasp of logic don't really grasp the burden of proof. So Matt Dillahunty says, if I claim that there's no God, I have a burden of proof. Well, actually, that's nonsense. It sounds like you should have, because you're making a positive claim that there's no God. Yeah. But the simple fact is that the claim that there's no God couldn't make sense except in the presence of the claim that there is one. And that's why the burden of proof is always affirmative. So if I say like the null hypothesis? If I say there is no God, that is not an affirmative claim. It's a denying claim. and the burden of proof is always on the affirmative. Suppose, for example, I were to say,
okay, I think I see what you're saying.
Suppose I say Furzelwurgel doesn't exist. What would your response be?
I think I'd say,
what the fuck's that?
I think I'd say, or doesn't exist. Yeah, I guess I would have to say, prove that it. I don't know. I don't really know.
But the point is that the denying
doesn't exist
makes no
if you
sense.
say it does.
It makes
yeah, you're right. It doesn't make any sense. It's a non-statement.
Yeah, it's the term hasn't been defined.
Yeah.
The term God hasn't been defined. It never has been. You get some vague wibble about what some of his characteristics may or may not be. It varies from person to person. But this entity has never ever been defined. It's just been asserted to exist. So in the absence of that claim, the denying claim makes no sense. Therefore, burden of proof has to be on the affirmative, and that's true in all cases. There's absolutely no. If you make a denying claim, you have no burden of proof. That's a simple logical fact.
Okay.
It's one that's not well understood though, because it's not immediately obvious until you actually pull it apart and see the underlying logic to what the onus probandi is, what is the actual fallacy being committed, shifting the burden of proof.
Apologia says, I disagree, Tony. I am cancer-free is a positive claim.
Yeah, but cancer's been defined.
Okay. Oh, I see. He says all you need is a definition. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. It's a referent. There is a referent, and it's demonstrable. If you're going against a demonstrated fact, then you do have a burden of proof. If you're saying that what we understand to be true because we've observed it is not true, then that does carry a burden of proof because that's an affirmative claim. But in the absence of a referent, there can be no burden of proof. Yeah, cancer has a referent.
Right. Yeah. This is why with them I try to avoid philosophy, and that's why I employ people such as yourself to fight the philosophic beliefs on my behalf.
Yeah,
because the whole thing about I do not claim to understand a lot of philosophy. I wish I did. It's a very interesting subject. I have high respect for the people who do. But I have difficulties with a lot of it, and so that's why I try to, when I have these conversations with people, I try to stick to the biological claims because I know that they will inevitably flounder on those.
Yeah,
they just cannot support a creationist argument using biology, using any science, but I know biology kind of well, so so I try to get them there.
I'm the same, but I find that because of the areas of interest I have, I actually struggle sometimes to make an argument, and in actual fact I was going to say that my the one argument that people make that I would correct is that, or the the misconception that people have is that the Big Bang represents any sort of beginning.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
That one, but the Big Bang is just the name we have for the fact that the universe is expanding. That's it. That's the whole story.
Yeah. RJ and I talk about that kind of stuff. He calls it origins or bust, because as soon as you get them to start talking about biology, and I think Kent Hovind has been a big factor in this. If you ask a lot of them to talk about evolutionary biology, they say, well, we can't start talking about that until we talk about the origin of life, the origin of matter, and the origin of the universe, which are all, of course, irrelevant to the point. But they all think it's totally 100% necessary to talk about the origin of the universe before we can talk about the origin of life, which is it's very frustrating trying to explain to them the definition of evolution.
I found a really good way of getting around that. In terms of the origin of the universe, my first point is, what makes you think there was anything like an origin? What if you find universe? What makes you think that the universe? I think of the universe as being everything that exists, that which is my operating definition of universe. So in that in that context, what possible justification can we have for saying that it had an origin? I mean, from my perspective, it doesn't matter. I know the science well enough to know that we have models both with and without a beginning. It makes no difference to me. I'm not invested in it either way. You know, I'm not really firmly wed to either proposition.
What would you say about the Charlie tried to he said the like thermodynamics excludes an eternal universe. Can you tell me about that? I couldn't really find what he was talking about on the internet.
It's nonsense. The idea is basically that he would say that the second law of thermodynamics means that entropy is always increasing, and that therefore the universe can't have been low entropy for very long, because entropy must continue to increase. So the universe has to be low entropy for there to be a beginning, in order for there to be an increase. However, it's a mistake to talk about thermodynamics in the context of cosmic origins, for the simple reason that whichever thermodynamic law you erect to talk about the origin of the universe, one of the other thermodynamic laws flatly contradicts it. So if we say that the universe energy can't be eternal because of entropy, then the first law of thermodynamics tells us that energy can't be created or destroyed. So that rules that argument out. If you say it can't have had an origin, because of the first law of thermodynamics, we can say that the second law rules that out. So to even try to apply thermodynamics to the origin of the universe is a category mistake, in my opinion. I think that there's been a lot of talk. William Lane Craig again, Calamity Craig as I call him, he likes to cite a theorem by Alex Vilenkin, Alvin Board and Alan Guth, in which they say they put out a paper called "Inflationary Spacetimes Are Not Past Complete," and basically what this tells us is that there's an issue with inflationary cosmologies. So just to clarify, because I know this gets confused a lot, inflation and expansion are not the same thing. So expansion is just the idea that the universe is expanding. Inflation is actually an idea that solves several problems with the standard Big Bang model, and it's basically the idea that there was this period of hyper rapid expansion, exponential expansion at a really ridiculous rate, so that it went from sort of about the size of a millionth the width of a proton to something about the size of a peanut in an instant. And that's the whole of the inflation. And people think that the whole universe inflated, but no, it was just this little thing. And all that was for, all that does is it gets the temperature to equalize, because under a standard Big Bang model, there's not enough time for the temperature to equalize, because no information can travel faster than light. So to come back to this, Alan Guth is the guy who came up with the inflation idea in the 80s. He's that guy who looks a bit like, you don't get Coronation Street, do you? He looks like Roy Cropper. But he's an excellent cosmologist. So he's done some work with Alex Vilenkin and Alvin Board. And there's this famous theorem that gets batted about in apologetics now, called BGV theorem.
Okay.
And it basically says that because of entropy, that inflationary spacetimes can't be past complete. So what they're saying is that the universe definitely had an absolute beginning. And actually, I've read the paper and it says no such thing. What it actually says is that there are some problems with inflationary cosmology, and we need new physics apart from inflation to account for a certain period of the universe. But inflation isn't even the only game in town. There are various string theory solutions. In fact, inflation is a stringy solution as well, in essence. But there are various stringy theories as well as the brane world, which is basically the idea that these polydimensional membranes smack together, and that's the energy input of the Big Bang. and various other things. Lawrence Krauss famously has the universe from nothing idea, which is not really a model. It basically it's saying just with the laws of gravity and quantum mechanics, it's perfectly possible for a universe to arise from nothing. And in actual fact, if you've got
I read
nothing,
that book.
Yeah, and if you've got nothing, then something has to follow it because nothing is a state that can't persist.
Yeah, it was a very interesting book. I think that's one that is heinously misrepresented as them saying this is their model. It's like, well, no, it's a proposition of a potential model.
Yeah, it's just say, what he's actually saying is that if a universe did come from nothing, it wouldn't violate any physical laws and no magic would be required.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically it. And I wrote a review of that kindly got included in Lawrence Krauss's Wakelet profile. There you go, a bit of name dropping there. Sound the lovely alarm.
Maybe we'll have a visitation. He'll hear us in the waves. But yeah, I thought it was a very interesting book. That's another one of those books they don't ever read, but they talk about a lot.
Yes.
But yeah, when you mentioned that paper, William Lane Craig tried to use that paper in his debate with Sean Carroll, didn't he?
He did indeed.
And Sean Carroll came back with, I actually have one of the guys who wrote the paper, and he says you're wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I have I have a bit of text that I pull out occasionally from. There was a radio interview with Alan Guth and Neil Turek, who is one of the co-authors of the Brain Worlds model, along with Paul Steinhardt, and he actually says the Big Bang is not the beginning of time in my model. He says it categorically. So what goes before that is anyone's guess. Alan Guth has come round to the idea that actually there probably was an absolute beginning, but that's just based on this theorem that he came up with Alvin Bode and Alex Valenkin, and it's only because they haven't got the new physics that they need to make it past eternal. Well, that's it. It doesn't say that it can't be past eternal. They found a problem with it that we need new physics to explain, but we already know that we need new physics because if we didn't need new physics, we'd be able to marry quantum mechanics and general relativity and there'd be no problem. So
yeah, they just don't want to get hitched, I guess.
Yeah.
They've got other people in their lives.
Quite possible, and I think part of the problem with it is that it's entirely possible that they can't be married. It really is entirely possible, and not least because although we've managed to unify all the other forces, we don't actually know that gravity is a force. According to Einstein, it isn't. So, it's the curvature of space-time, which isn't a force.
Yeah.
So we don't know if force is required to curve space-time, but we do know that the curvature of space-time isn't in and of itself a force, and that's what gravity is the curvature of space-time. Now, whether there's an underlying thing, string theory has a proposal, the graviton, and there are other proposals, but we have to understand the Higgs better before we get much further than that. Simply because it's the Higgs is what gives mass. So until we understand how mass is related to space-time and how that whole interaction works, we can't really say anything. We don't even know at this point if space-time can be quantized. We do quantize it, and we have smallest units that we use to quantize it, but we don't actually know that it can be quantized. This is just because once you get below the Planck scale, the solutions tend to infinity, and of course, in a quantum theory, which is all probabilistic, you can't have an infinity because you can't have a number greater than one. The solution can't be greater than one because it's a probability. And in fact, all solutions over histories have to normalize to one. So when you add all the probabilities up, they have to equal one. Because you can't have a probability greater than certainty. So.
Yeah, you would have a fun time down here with the pre-suppers, I think.
Yeah.
I think you'd have a good time with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've I don't know. I wish I knew and could explain all of that to them. But I usually usually try to bog me down.
It's all available on a good blog near you.
Indeed, it is. Which I linked. As I said earlier, I linked your blog to the or in the description below, so people can go check all that stuff out. But yeah, they usually try to avoid the science, which is funny because they usually take the conversation there first, and then when someone like me challenges them on the biology, for instance, they say, "Oh, well, your epistemology is wrong. You're looking at this from the wrong worldview." So it's like, wait a minute, what happened to the science we were just discussing?
Yeah, I've found a method to frustrate even that as well, because I don't have a worldview. I don't have beliefs. I know it sounds really, but that's one of those really bizarre things that you hear people say. What do you mean you don't have beliefs? Beliefs are just things you think to be true. No, there's nothing that I think is true. It either is true or it isn't. There's nothing that I think is true that I can't prove is true. And belief is superfluous. I've got absolutely no use. To be honest, and most of it's about terminology because I have no use for the term because it covers such a diverse range of epistemological states that and most of them entirely unsupported. There's just this one thing that we call justified and true that we still call a belief. Everything else is not justified and can't be shown to be true. They're just beliefs. So to apply the term to that one thing where there is justification, and have it lumped in with all this other stuff for which there's no justification, it just makes the term entirely useless. So I say there is that which I know, there is that which I don't know, there is that which I accept as the best model we currently have pending further evidence. That's it. That's all the three things I need in my epistemology. Go on, knock them down.
Of course, they don't have. I guarantee the guys who are coming out there yelling at young people on the sidewalk do not have the knowledge necessary to deal with any of those claims.
No,
they have their books, that they have vaguely read, maybe skimmed, but they're not really taking this in and looking at the implications of a lot of these beliefs. Like, for example, mutation rates. RJ did his video with Paul that titled it "Immortal Bunny Eyes," and so Answers in Genesis is talking about like rabbits. Rabbits have eyes on the side of their head because they are preyed upon, and so it's generally correlated that mammals that are preyed upon often have the eyes on the side of their head as opposed to in the front.
Yeah, which is usually for predators, so they have better depth perception, so they can spot the distance of the target.
Or us in primates, so we can grab branches.
Yeah.
But
no, that's prey assault, isn't it? I mean, it's being able to quickly, you need depth perception, is what we're saying, really.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like they in their model where the Earth is only about 6,000 years old, we can't generate that kind of variation in that time period. We cannot do it.
No.
With animals that have that long of lifespans, that have this complex genomes, we just can't do it with that much, with that little time.
No, let alone the hyper evolution that they're talking about.
Which is
inflationary cosmology to shame.
It's so bizarre because I don't think they think about it. They propose it. They say, okay, all the animals got off the ark, which they can't tell us which animals got off the ark, but another issue. And then they say, and then the kind trees, the orchard, all sprouted. Of course, they can't tell you which ones. What a kind is. They can't tell you what got off the ark, what speciated into what, how far the common ancestry goes, which is a dirty word or phrase.
I love to cite Theobald for that. 1 in 10 to the 2,680. Creationists love massive numbers, especially when they're probability ratios. 1 in 10 to the 2,680.
Yeah.
They, when in Theobald's formal test of universal common descent.
Yeah, there's a paper that circulates from the ICR, I think. Maybe it didn't originate there, but it's on the ICR webpage, and it's the mathematical impossibility of evolution. And it's really funny that they titled it that, because in the whole paper, it doesn't state that evolution is impossible. It just states over and over and over that evolution is mathematically improbable.
Yeah.
They say, which is just, it's so funny. It's like, why did you name it the mathematical impossibility if this whole paper is just about, it's very, very, very unlikely this is going to happen? Kind of defeats the whole purpose. Kind of renders your title null and void.
Yeah.
And it's really funny because if they actually did the mathematics as biologists do, their whole classes on like mathematical, phylogenetics and all that jazz, very high level math stuff, that show it's not impossible. In fact, for evolution to occur, it's inevitable. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Populations can't not vary in allele frequency from generation to generation. They can't do it.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, the Hardy-Weinberg principle. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But the other thing is that sorry, I lost my train of thought then. Oh, never mind. I'm sure it'll come back to me. Mustn't have been important.
The secret of life, and now we've forgotten it.
Oh, I forget the secret of life 50 times a day. It's one of those things when you spend all your time thinking, especially when you spend all your time thinking about thinking, which is pretty much all I do.
I actually did a video on the Hardy-Weinberg equation. It's the mathematics of population genetics. It's the second video I made for my evidence for evolution group of videos.
Yeah.
That was I remember doing that because I started off by reading that article because I had seen it. Someone posted it on Twitter, and I read it, and then I read. Well, of course, I came up with my own ideas for why it was wrong, but I also read a rebuttal of it, which made a lot of the same points that I thought about while I was reading it, and so came up with all that. But did you remember it?
No. Do I remember it?
Oh, that's okay. I'll distract them with my juggling in the meantime.
No, I did remember something else though that
okay.
that I wanted to raise. There's people talk about yes, life. I suppose I've been wanting to have this discussion with somebody who's got some biological savvy for a while, because I'm not sure. I have this thing that there's clearly apologists have a hard on for life. They
gotta get their hands on it.
As you say, it's as you say, Jim calls it origins or bust. My question is, what is it about life that people think it warrants some sort of special explanation? Why does nobody talk about the origin of flying, or the origin of walking, or any number? Because life is just a behavior, and that's what people don't get. They think of it as being a thing.
Well, I think for that specific example, if we were to ask a creationist why the origin of life is so special, is that one of the days of creation is God just makes all the flying critters and all the swimming creatures. So he just kind of lumps them all together, and so they don't worry about the evolution of flight or stuff like that. I don't know. I think it's very arbitrary, isn't it? I think they just want to latch onto that because it's something that we know some bits about, but nothing really concrete. We know, for instance, but really at this point, it's almost all the steps leading up to life have been explained, and they occur naturally.
Yeah.
Amino acids occur naturally. Nucleobases, not hard to make. Carbohydrates, lipids. Organic. I think they also don't understand, and this again, like they started on a foundation where they don't understand. They don't even begin to understand the terms that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Methane and propane and butane and all the others are organic.
Yeah.
It's like you have to ask them, do you think there's anything organic that's not alive?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just
yeah, bandits at 12 o'clock.
Nestlig is right. It's chemistry at its very foundation. It's just chemistry. I think chemistry is very interesting.
Nestlig. One of my cohorts from the League of Reason.
Yeah, he's over there in the live chat. It's they don't understand what organic means. They don't understand what life is, as you pointed out, and then I put it in a video shortly after you said it. That life is a set of characteristics.
I don't even know that. I object to. I kind of have to object to characteristics, properties, the behaviors that don't.
Behavior. There we go. Life is a set of.
Yeah, because I think that's part of the problem is that we think of life as a property or as a thing.
Well,
it's just a behavior of matter under certain circumstances.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and we only attach this significance to it because we're alive. Really,
we're what we call alive.
Yeah, so it's a Hitchens would call it a curious form of solipsism.
But again, to get them to understand that life is is this behavior of that matter has under certain conditions, that's again going to go completely over their heads. Yeah. They're just not going to understand. They think, oh, well, because a lot of them believe in a soul, even though they're not really sure who has a soul, who doesn't have a soul, or what does, I should say. It's like, do all living things have souls? Do trees have souls?
Anything that any organism that gastrulates has a soul. It's an arsehole, but
I like what Arden Ross says is like when we are developing, so we're deuterostomes, so we develop our anus before our head. So at one point you are literally just a butt.
Yeah. Yeah, most of them still are.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Yeah, they don't understand what it would be. They don't understand, even aside from the organic, that there are organic molecules that aren't alive. Aside from that, we can make all these polymers rather easily. They still don't understand the process of abiogenesis itself.
Yeah.
It's just foreign. They think like a bacteria, like just fully formed bacteria, just came from this pond that got struck by lightning, it seems.
Yeah.
And which is just...
Yeah, some of that's Darwin's fault.
Yeah.
One can imagine a warm little pond. Yeah, no.
But I mean, that's the other thing. I think that's actually something I use when they say abiogenesis is necessary to evolution. I say, well, if you actually read Origin of Species, you'd see Darwin devotes a single sentence in his tome to the process. And he doesn't even, just one sentence, he says, well, maybe we can imagine it started in a warm pond somewhere, and then moves on. That's it. That's the most he talks about it.
Indeed.
Of course, they wouldn't know that because they don't read it. And and James is right. They don't read the primary source literature. Yeah, they went from Nestlig says creationists think that abiogenesis went from just rock to poof life, as in the same way that God made Adam from dirt. I like that because that is it. That's what they really think. They don't understand biopolymers or cross chirality. They don't understand metabolism. Well, metabolism's a weird thing, anyways.
Yeah.
But
oh, I remembered. I remembered. This was it. The Kent Hovind 6 types of evolution. This is what we get. This is what we were talking about at the time, and I remember what it was that I wanted to say. I wanted to say, yeah, fine, evolution, all of it, because it is, in a sense. When we talk about biological evolution, we're talking about biological evolution, and in general terms, we don't qualify the term, but in actual fact, cosmic evolution, all of the types of evolution that Hovind is talking about are real evolution. They genuinely are evolution. They're just not biological evolution. And I've got no problem with abiogenesis being an evolutionary process. It has to be. It can't be otherwise, really, because we know. I mean, we know now what Pasteur, for example, didn't know, namely that we can track the history of the universe, and we know that at one time there was no element heavier than beryllium, and that in even only trace amounts from Big Bang nucleosynthesis. Everything heavier than beryllium had to be synthesized in stellar nucleosynthesis, which required the first generations of stars to die. So we know there was no life. We know that life evolved. You know, it was an evolutionary process that got life started. However you slice it, and I've got absolutely no problem owning that. Of course, I will correct them when they say, "Oh well, this is what I've got against evolutionary theory." Well, yes, evolutionary theory doesn't deal with abiogenesis. It deals with biodiversity. It's nothing to do with abiogenesis. But abiogenesis is still an evolutionary process. It has to be. Can't be otherwise.
Yeah. Evolution.
Yeah, Nestlig is latching on evolution like it's not. I understand what he's saying, but we're talking about biological evolution. We're talking about it without the qualifier. But in actual fact, evolution is just change. Evolution is just change from one state to another.
I think it's what's really interesting is that they are always talking about how abiogenesis is a just so story. Oh, and then I'll get back to the Kent Hovind types of evolution, because that is something else that bothers me about those. But they talk about how it's a just so story. We can't test any parts of this. It's just, this is what you want to believe because you want to sin, and yeah. And so that's, Karis is right. That's what I wanted to talk about. His definitions of micro and macro always bother me because they're flat wrong. Because he has a word that he's not only misdefined, he's defined it with a word that he hasn't defined. Yeah, so it was like they're
kind.
It was like your example. Yeah, kind is the word, but it was like your example earlier with like fluzzle nuzzle doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Like, well, what on earth is fluzzle nuzzle? And so it's the same exact thing. We could actually we could change the word kind for fluzzle nuzzle and it still means the exact same thing. So absolutely nothing. And so that's, I think Arnrod did a really good deconstruction of that, of the idea of kinds in his video he put out in like 2011, I think it was, called the Phylogeny Challenge.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's very. You've seen it?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, great video.
I'm a big fan of Aaron. We've not interacted a huge amount over the years, but we joined League of Reason in roughly the same time. I think probably a couple of weeks apart, and we've interacted a little bit over there.
It's a very regal name. You guys don your capes and go fight for reason.
Well, I mean, to be honest, that's how it was. Not a lot of people still remember the inception story of the League of Reason, but what it came about as a result of there was a concerted effort. We've talked about something similar recently on Twitter, but there was a concerted effort by creationists. They kind of got together in groups and went and downvoted loads of videos by rationalists, and basically the League of Reason was set up as a kind of response to that. So it was all YouTubers initially. It started by Andromeda's Wake and a few other guys back in 2009 or something like that.
Okay.
And so yeah, I mean, that's literally what it was, a League of Reason YouTubers. It was rational YouTube channels, and that's how it all started. So the name wasn't inapt.
That's pretty neat. If only I had been there. What was I doing at the time? Sitting around, certainly.
Reading comics, no doubt.
Actually, I never really got into comics. I mean, I tried reading one series that seemed to be very interested in getting money because it would, as you read it, it would like shoot off all these other stories, or it would have like it would be a part of a cross section of another chain of stories, and so of course you'd have to buy those to know what those are talking about. And I kind of got through part of it, and then I was like, okay, I can't even keep up anymore. There's too much stuff.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I have been an atheist since I was 11. So it's been about 8 years now, almost 9 years. Nope. Wait. Yes. Yep. I forget how old I am sometimes.
Yeah, I do that, but I've got an excuse, namely that I'm old.
More years than me to forget.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I've never been anything else. I tried to believe when I was young, because I come from a very, very large Irish, very, very Catholic family, and it seemed really important to people around me that I believe. You know, they genuinely thought that it was a very bad thing not to believe. I couldn't get past the bullshit, and the final nail in the coffin was actually Noah's Ark. So it's you know it's and it wasn't even, you know, this would have been back when I was 7 or 8, or you know, thereabouts, and I was at Sunday school, and the story of Noah's Ark came out, and we'd already had the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. So God, after having failed to remove sin from the world, decided to come up with this other plan, despite the fact they were supposed to be all powerful. Couldn't think of anything better than killing almost everything on the planet, except for a few animals that he put on a boat with a 600-year-old drunken barge captain. And it, you know, even to my developing bullshit detectors, this you know, the Awooga Waltz was loud and clear. So I just couldn't put it together with, you know, it just didn't make any bloody sense. It's complete nonsense. So it was obvious to me straight away that it was bullshit, and it's just strengthened since then. The more I've learned, and of course, it would have been not long after that I first read the Bible cover to cover. What a horrible book!
I have not tackled that issue fully yet. Read some books, but not the whole thing.
Yeah, my recommendation, if you want to tackle that, is to get the Lolcat Bible.
The what kind?
The Lolcat.
Oh.
Where God is ceiling cat. I should have a link to the online version.
The Lolcat version of the Bible. I gotta look this up. This sounds ridiculous.
I shall get you a link. Pop it in the chat.
Lolcat Bible. Okay. I like what James said. William James said, "I don't know how belief in the divine authorship of the Bible can survive the reading of it."
Absolutely, yeah. And there are things I love about the Bible. I love the King James because I love the language in it. As you can tell, I'm something of a fan of language, so I cherish the King James Bible just because of the way the language is used. But I actually own 6 different versions of the Bible, and I've read them all at least once or twice.
Wow.
So I'm not unfamiliar with what it says, unlike most people who defend it.
Yeah. Neslick asked a good question. He said, "Can we talk about the creationist concept of new information?" You want to take that, or shall I?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, this it's not often that we get into an area of science that actually directly relates to what I do. Not everybody will be aware, but by profession, I'm a musician and audio engineer. So information theory is actually really important to what. In fact, I've probably forgotten more about information theory than any creationist has ever learned about it. And the simple fact is, as in a lot of cases, we've been here before in this conversation, is that they don't define information in any useful way, but that sand dunes give us new information, dog shit gives us new information. I've actually done a couple of posts about information, specifically about information in DNA, and it's what it is. It's the usual category error, that DNA being a code. Well, I'm sorry, but it isn't a code. The genetic code is what we have imposed on it. It's more of a cipher than a code. In fact, it's what we've imposed upon it. It's the language that we've imposed on this chemical molecule, so that we can understand it better. So that there aren't really letters and words. There are nuclear bases, and and they are the information. It's not that there's no message in there. And the more important point, I think, in this is that there are 2 very distinct formulations of information theory. The first is Shannon information. Comes from Claude Shannon, who was a communications engineer. So he was interested in transmission and reception. So in Shannon's formulation, there is such thing as a maximal information content.
Okay.
Because he's dealing with signal transmission and reception, you can't get more information than a clean signal. So his theory dealt specifically with things like sample rates, what sample rate you needed to make sure that you captured all the information. There's a famous theorem that audio engineers use called Shannon-Nyquist theorem, which basically says that the sample rate of information must be twice the highest frequency, and then you're guaranteed to capture all of the information. The resolution must be at least twice the frequency. So that's why, for example, when we put an audio CD in, the sample rate is 44.1 kilohertz, because the upper limit of human hearing is somewhere around the 20 kilohertz range. So we have a sample rate of just above twice that. In video, it tends to be 48K, but it's for all the same reasons. And the only reason we have higher sample rates than that is so that we can do interesting things in terms of signal processing, because, of course, that sample rate, you can think of it as being like a staircase. So if you want to apply some processing, that processing has to be applied in steps. So you up the sample rates so that you have more steps in a space, so that you can do more radical changes, and those changes will take, because if you have a lower sample rate, you can actually hear the step in. So that's all. But Shannon himself, who formulated this, actually wrote a book with a guy called Warren Weaver, and he said specifically, the word information in this theory is a special usage. It's not to be confused with the vernacular usage. For example, a signal that's complete gibberish can be regarded as being exactly the same as a one that's got message content in terms of the information content that they contain.
Okay.
So we shouldn't take information to mean message. Now that's the formulation that all the creationists rely on, and that's what they're talking about in information in DNA. However, there's another formulation of information theory by a guy called Kolmogorov. And he's a computer engineer, and he was dealing with information storage. Now, when you're dealing with information storage, there can't be a maximal information content, because each bit of noise, any noise that's introduced into the signal, constitutes an increase in information. So in Shannon, information can only decrease from the maximal content. In Kolmogorov, the clean signal can increase in information by the addition of noise. And specifically, the more random things are, the more information content it has. And I like to use an example of, say, take a string of 100 ones, the number one, a string of 100 of them. So that's a very regular repeating signal. So there are lots and lots of ways that we can compress that. And in fact, I've already given one of them. A string of 100 ones is shorter than, it's shorter into that actually constitutes a compression of the string of 100 ones, because it's less than 100 characters. Yeah. So suppose we introduce some zeros into it. So say we have 9 ones followed by a 0, and then we repeat that 9 times. So we've still got 100 characters, but we can compress it less because it's got the zeros in it. So it's not as regular repeating. So we can't apply as much compression to it. Therefore, it has greater information content. By the time you get to something more like a random string of ones and zeros, you can't compress it at all. And the shortest representation of the signal is the string itself. So that's the shortest possible representation. So that's the most information. That's the highest information content that you can have in 100 characters, because it's completely random. And for example, if you look at, I mean, you're probably too young to remember, but back in the old days, before we all had LED TVs, we had these. You remember cathode ray tube TVs?
I have seen them. Yeah,
you've seen them. Yeah, but in a museum. Yeah. So when you tune one of those off a channel, what you're seeing is nothing but noise. Yeah. But there's also information content in that, because about 1% of what you see in that is noise from the cosmic microwave background. So there is actually information about the universe in that signal. So for all of these treatments of information that creationists use completely fail to understand what information is. Information is actually what we impose on it. We make it information when we're informed by it. So I mean, I don't think there's a huge amount more that you could say about it, except of course that if you know anything about computer engineering, which I'm sure you do, because you kind of can't do evolution nowadays without at least touching on it, can you? But but you know what hexadecimal code looks like, yes?
Yeah.
Right. So hexadecimal code, you can have a string of hexadecimal code. And again, as a sound engineer, I use a fair bit of this, because MIDI system exclusive messages are all hex. So you can have the same hexadecimal code and transmit it to 2 different musical instruments, and they will read it differently. They will read a different set of instructions. So the information that they take from it is what they impose on it, is what they're translating it as. And the information in DNA is what we impose on it when we're trying to understand it. So we call cytosine C and adenine A and so on. And that's the code. The code is our treatment of it, not the thing itself.
Right. Yeah. So how does the molecules contain information?
Yeah. So in other words, the whole information illusion it's a category mistake. And I like to one of my favorite phrases: the map is not the terrain. And they're massively conflating the map with the terrain when they
Korzybski, was it?
No, I don't know. I thought it was original to me. That
you what?
I thought that one was original to me. One that's original to me is DNA is a code in precisely the same way that London is a map.
Yeah. I think Korzybski was his name. He's like a philosopher of language.
Right.
He's one of the guys. Words don't have inherent meanings, which of course a lot of presuppositional apologists say they do, which is why they believe the Bible is. There's only one translation or one interpretation of the Bible that can be correct because words have inherent meanings, which is bogus, bogus.
Yeah.
But when
and actually that raises a good point because you know as well as I do that an awful lot of creationist, well, not even just creationist, but theistic apologetics in general gets mired in these long-winded, boggy semantic discussions, and they completely overlook the point of semantics. There should never be a semantic argument. There should only ever be a discussion on semantics where you clarify terms so that each of you knows what the other one means. And if you can't agree on a specific usage, you at least agree that this is what I mean when I say it, and this is what you mean when you say it. Now let's get on with the discussion. There should never be any argument about semantics. Because it's just a, and dismissing an argument on the basis that it's a semantic argument is, I like to call it the equivalent of diving in the penalty area. To use a footballing analogy, it's a cheat. It's because semantics deals with what we mean when we say a thing, so it's the heart. It's central to the way we communicate. If we're not sorting our definitions out, then we're not. There's no point arguing. That's not what that means. Say, okay, that's what you mean by it. Fine. This is what I mean by it. If clearly we mean different things by it, but as long as we understand that shouldn't be a barrier to communication. Let's move on.
Right.
They don't actually want to get to the content.
That's true. Yeah. Well, if we can't agree on the term, then there's no argument here. It's like, well, no. Of course, you have to kind of bridge the gap with your. Karis is right. If you can't agree on a definition, you can't discuss. So, but when I talk to them about information, again, I wish that was a set of things I could say to them. Usually I just ask them, what do you mean by information? Which is something I think I'm getting better at doing, asking them what they mean by words. Because I know I have a problem of saying or of assuming what they mean, which not good ever. But I'll sometimes think, okay, well, they must be referring to this. But as I've had more conversations with them and I've tried to limit myself in what I say to them or think more about what I'm saying, I started to ask them, okay, what do you mean by information? Which they can't ever answer because they don't know what they mean by information. They think when they have that old line that they trot out inevitably that DNA has information. And I always ask them, okay, what part of DNA is the information? They just say, oh, well, it's full of it. And so I try to get them to clarify. Do you mean the protein coding genes, the endogenous retroviruses, the ALUs, the non-functional pseudogenes? What do you mean when you say this word information?
Yeah, I like to say that DNA has information about nested hierarchies. That foxes them every time.
Yeah, of course they get upset when we tell them dogs and cats are related to each other, even though hyenas look like dogs and foxes act like cats. But
yeah, I always love to put up a picture of a thylacine and say, "What kind is this?"
Oh yeah, thylacinus. That'd be because whatever they say, they're going to be wrong.
Yep.
Yeah. They'd be like, nope, it's a marsupial.
Yeah, no, it's kangaroo kind, you moron.
Maybe I should bring a picture up to them and ask them, hey, what kind is this thylacinus?
Yeah.
That, I think. Yeah, or someone was asking me yesterday, or someone made me think of tunicates yesterday. What kind are the tunicates in? Because they're chordates, like us, but they're sessile. When they grow up, they don't move. They're like little tadpole-looking guys when they're babies. Well, some tunicates are like free floating, but a lot of them are sessile. Those like the pyrosomes, which are turning up all over the western seaboard, which are tunicates. But the you look at tunicates, they look kind of plant like. I think they look kind of plant like, but they they look like little tadpoles and they're born, but then they settle down and they stay in one spot for the rest of their life and just filter feed. So what kind are these guys in? Why would they look like, or why would they have the same chordate characteristics as us? Heck, why would lancelets have the same chordate characteristics as us? What's the point of that?
Yeah.
Why are starfish and hemichordates, why are they all deuterostomes? Why do we all develop the same way? Why do we develop the same way as these guys? Why do we have these certain characteristics?
Yeah.
I usually don't get to that though, but I should.
And your answer can't contain the word Hox.
Yeah, I would. Oh man, Hox genes. That's something I've been doing a lot more reading about recently. As you saw, I did my embryology video yesterday, and so I've been reading a bit about those, trying to understand them because they're absolutely fascinating. Hox genes are just really cool.
Yep. Yeah. And my favorites are the FoxP2, and Sonic Hedgehog, of course.
Oh yeah, good old Sonic. They had a Sonic Hedgehog gene, which actually reminds me. Which reminds me, I have been working on a book. For those of you who don't know, it's on phylogenetics.
I'm very good at it too.
Oh, thank you very much. It's FoxP2, which is a general mammal gene that ends up as part of our language processing. Quote James Downard. But thank you very much for reviewing that book for my manuscript. Thanks for reviewing it.
No problem. It was very good. It was an easy read. To be honest, I would probably need to read it again, because I just kind of went through it pretty much in one sitting once I found the time to sit down and do it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, because I was aware that I'd had it for a week and not done anything with it.
That's okay. Yeah, that I think because the whole system of phylogenetics is just a thorn in the side of a thorn in the side of the whole kind argument. Because phylogenetics is just why are guys related to each other.
Yeah.
Turns out, we're actually related to everything else on some level or another.
Indeed.
And so
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that was the whole reason I wrote it, because I want to display that we have these characteristics, we have these genetics, we're sharing all these things with other guys. Why the heck would we have the same genes or endogenous retroviruses as chimps? What sense does that make? Why would we share 96% of our DNA with gorillas, et cetera, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. I should introduce you to Abby Smith. You get on famously. Do you know of Abby Smith?
Abby Smith?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I can check.
She's like the world's premier expert on endogenous retroviruses.
Oh, that's cool.
She has her blog is actually called ERV. She's on the.
There are lots of Abby Smiths on.
Yeah, she's on the Science Blogs network. I'm pretty sure Aaron knows her actually.
Okay.
But I have her on. I have her as a Facebook friend. I'll send her a recommend for you. But she's brilliant. If you have questions about ERV, she's all over them.
Oh yeah, that's another. Nestlig is right. The Cambrian something. The Cambrian is something I didn't really cover it in Phylogeny at a Glance, which still title. I have to work on that one in the future. But I do.
I would call it. I did actually come up with it. I did actually come up with a title.
Okay.
One candidate. I did think that I should probably give it a little bit more thought, but the one I came up with is It's All Relative.
It's All Relative?
Yeah.
Okay. That's an interesting title.
You never know, you might get the physics nerds to pick it up as well.
Yeah, that is a very, very interesting title. I had a conversation with I emailed one book company a little while back asking about it, and I told you have to send them like a letter of inquiry letter telling them what you propose to write about and all that jazz. And so I sent it to them. I said, "Oh, my book's on phylogenetics," and they said, every book we can see on that is incredibly dense and does not sell very well. And I was like, oh. I just thought, well, that's something. But yeah, if I do write a book on how evolution works, I will definitely have to include a section on the Cambrian, because that should be addressed on its own.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons I didn't cover it in my evolution post is that I plan to do a post just on the Cambrian as well.
Mm-hmm. Hey, I'm always here if you need any pointers.
Yes, yes, indeed. And I mean the obvious thing is that an explosion that takes 20 million years or so, or anywhere up to 80. I mean, it's the figure is quite fluid depending on who you speak to.
Like the animal Hox genes appeared. Genes that we all share with all other metazoans appeared in the Cryogenian, which started it's like 600 something million years ago. And so there was a paper I read. RJ, can you find it? Was on was it Cambrian Conundrum? And so it's about it's like there's a lag between when the animal Hox genes are theorized to have originated and the ecological success of the metazoans, which may or may not be the title of the paper, but that's what it's about.
Right.
And so it shows that, and of course the whole thing about, well, these guys probably, or they didn't fossilize well because they were soft-bodied, because predation wasn't a huge issue for a long time, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And, I mean, I suppose one of the biggest problems I have is the focus on fossils anyway. And I mean, I know that fossils were a big part of what kicked off the evolutionary revolution in terms of our understanding, but the fossils are almost insignificant in terms of the evidence for evolution now. And
yes,
I spend very little time talking about fossils. I spend far more time talking about molecules because they're much more closely related to the things that I'm interested in anyway, with the physics and so on. And when you understand chemistry from a physicist perspective, that life is kind of easy. It's it's so I do wonder that so many people seem to think that all of the evidence for evolution is in the fossil record, when actually it doesn't even constitute a large part of it. It's a very tiny part of the evidence nowadays.
Yeah, you just got which is again the evidence for evolution. Heck, Dawkins wrote an entire book on it, The Greatest Show on Earth, which was a fabulous book.
I had my gripes with it.
Okay, it left some things out. The whole chapter about You Did It in 9 Months was the name of the chapter.
Yeah.
It was a long-winded explanation of like how proteins interact in cells, develop, and things like that, which I thought was kind of unnecessary.
Yeah.
I think that a good portion of that could have been left out, and it would have retained the reader could have retained the same amount of like the core issue here. I just kind of thought that part was unnecessary. They talked about the theodicy at the end, which I thought was kind of interesting. That was something I'd never heard of before.
Right.
Evolutionary theodicy. But yeah, I thought for the most part it was a pretty good book. But the evidence alone, it does deserve its own little area, because you've got biogeography. Of course, you got genetics first and foremost, as Francis Collins said. Like the evidence from genetics it's incontrovertible. We definitely know evolution happened from the genetics, but you can also look at biogeography, homologous structures. You can look at just atavisms, embryology, all this other stuff. And you never have to mention fossils.
Yeah,
I love fossils though. I absolutely love fossils.
ERVs alone are a slam dunk for me. The ERVs were the thing that when I first came across it, I pointed at it and I said, "That's it there. That's the irrefutable argument. That right there." And I'm not suggesting for a second that it's the only one, but that was the first one that I came across where there was absolutely no doubt what information you could take away from ERVs. Again, another recapitulation of nested hierarchies. But just the fact that these are introduced strains of DNA, and they precisely mirror the evolution relationships that we already knew were there. It was just the biggest slam dunk for me.
Yep.
So yeah, my biggest gripe with the Greatest Show on Earth was where he talked about the discovery of Tiktaalik, because he didn't go far enough.
Yeah, that's true.
He kind of glossed over it, and he didn't. What he should have pointed out straight away was how neat the bisection was, because it really was that. It was like smack in the middle. It was like, and not just of evolution, but of plate tectonics, of all these different fields. The simple fact that they went looking for something with these characteristics, and they knew where to look for it based on plate tectonics, because of course at the time when Tiktaalik was alive, the place in Canada where they were looking was on the equator, so only under plate tectonics could that be explained. So they follow plate tectonics and they say, right, this creature lived somewhere around here, and we know this because of the other things we found, Acanthostega and
you got like Eusthenopteron and other guys like that.
Yeah. And he but for me, he just failed to make the big deal of the discovery of Tiktaalik that it warranted, especially given how long it took them to find it. But knowing exactly where they needed to look.
Yeah,
it was like 5 years it took them to find it. But
I know RJ has a gripe with the book. He's upset that the reptile mammal transition wasn't included.
Yes.
He spent a lot of time. He spent a whole chapter just dealing with like the hominin fossils, which is cool. I mean, hominin fossils are definitely cool, but I think that could have been included with the other stuff. I thought it was really funny though, in that he put part of his conversation, which is on YouTube, that he had with Wendy Wright, and he tells her, just go to the museum, just go look at the fossils. And she says, oh, I've been to the museums. We don't have the fossils. He says, no, we'll go right now. It's like, we'll go look together at the fossils.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, I'm not going to do that. No, I refuse. Yeah, just such an annoying woman.
Yeah.
Show me the evidence. Show me the evidence.
Come on, then. I'll go and show you. No.
No, I don't think so. I'd rather stay here.
Have you been engaged with any of the flat earthers?
No, that's not really my fight. I have never engaged with the flat earthers before. I've never engaged with the flat earthers, with anti-vaxxers, although I was thinking of putting a video out on anti-vaxxers in the near future. We'll see how that goes, I guess. Moon landing hoaxers, never really been about them either. The flat earthers, I think they're just kind of comical. I mean, I know with creationists, we kind of ask ourselves, or if you're innocent enough, you ask yourself, wow, people still believe this? But it's like, once you get on Twitter and YouTube, you realize, yes, people believe this stuff. They believe what they say. And so I really love the video that you posted, or that you linked us to Cool Hard Logic's video or videos, because he did the three. And it is just it was great. I really enjoyed it. I thought those videos were fantastic.
Yeah, he's very amusing. It's a shame he seems to have gone a little bit quiet. But I like his approach. It reminds me kind of me a little bit. I like what he does with names. I mean, he uses my favorite word a lot.
Oh yeah, and I love the every time he talked about the flat Earth, he called it a different name. It was like their floating space pizza.
Yeah.
Every time I heard that, I just had to start laughing again because he just changes the name.
Yeah.
But
I really like what he does with names as well. There was one he did about a guy called Geronism, and he
said, yes,
he's really particular about not being called Geranism. So I'll make sure I avoid that. So here's what Jism thinks.
Yep, that's pretty funny.
My favorite YouTuber of all time is still Pothole54. He's just awesome.
Yeah, yeah, he's really good.
He doesn't get involved. He doesn't rise. He just debunks the science. He's impeccably sourced. I mean, it's clear that he's a proper science journalist as well. And he spends as much time berating. I should have a conversation with him at some point if I can ever get through to him. But he lots of demands on his time. But I would love to see if I can get him to stop being so disparaging about bloggers, because bloggers aren't all bad. But he's got this. He's really blinking about bloggers.
I
fully understand it, because there's an awful lot of shit on blogs, isn't there?
Yeah. I was
a bit on mine, but
I don't think so. But I do understand that everyone's got a blog nowadays.
Yeah.
And so it's just their, and for the majority of them, it's just their 2 cents on this, that, and the other. And some blogs are popular enough that they have actual consequences in real life.
Yeah.
And not good ones. And so but I think there are a lot of good blogs out there. Tetrapod Zoology by Darren Naish is a really good one.
Yeah.
With Scientific American.
Yeah. Phil Platt, Bad Astronomer, is very good. There are lots of good ones, but I mean, he's right that they do tend to be overwhelmed by the shit, and the problem, of course, is that, and he makes this point himself, that if you're just going to spout bollocks and regurgitate what you've read in some newspaper, then it doesn't take any time at all to produce content for your blog. If you're being meticulous and finding out what the actual facts are, that takes time and effort and dedication. You really have to go and find your sources. And actually, that reminds me, I really must start getting more sources in my stuff, because my problem is that my blog isn't a conventional blog. It was never. I'm never intended to be a blogger. My motivation for presenting the blog presenting it in the form of a blog is that I have lots and lots of friends who are really knowledgeable about lots and lots of subjects, because I've been doing this a long time. I know lots of professionals in all sorts of research fields. and of course this is all source material for a book that I'm writing about how we think about things and about how we misapply logic in everyday situations and how we should be going about assessing truth claims and that sort of thing. So because there's an awful lot of fairly heavy duty content that I want to talk about, I wanted to put it out there in public where all my friends could access it and correct me where necessary and make sure that I wasn't misrepresenting anything, because I talk about stuff that's really, some of it's quite outside my area of interest. And while I know what I'm talking about, it's always entirely possible that there are little bits and pieces that I get wrong, because I tend to be a kind of a generalist when it comes to scientific knowledge. I'm far more interested in physics and cosmology, but that's not to say that I even know that much about those. I know a fair bit, and in certain areas I know more than most. But I'm also aware that I'm not a professional scientist. Mathematics is something that I struggle with. I have to work really, really hard to work my way through equations. I can do it, and I know how to do it, and I understand what all the constants are. But it's a chore.
What is it? The old I know enough to know that I don't know anything.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Plato's famous dictum about knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah, which is why we love throwing around the Dunning-Kruger phrase for so many of those poor little presuppositionalists.
Yeah.
And creationists.
Yeah.
They're all just not all of them. Okay, a lot of them are poster children for the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah.
Because they're not just wrong; they're arrogantly wrong.
Correct. Yeah. Or not even wrong, as Wolfgang Pauli would have said.
As we know, our good friend Charlie.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. But I mean, with the flat earthers and the anti-vaxxers, the reason I engage them is because really, for me, it's about the misrepresentation of science is dangerous. Even the innocent stuff like flat Earth, and of course, it's worth noting that all flat earthers are biblical creationists, because they're defending the flat Earth because they think that's how the Earth is described in the Bible.
That reminds me of something, but I'll tell you afterwards.
So it's just another one of those claims. It's like the radiometric dating claims and the information in DNA claims, and flat Earth is just another one of them. Anti-vaxxers, it's a shame that there's no such place as hell, because I would reserve a special place in hell for these fuckers. I really would. They are of the worst of science deniers. They are genuinely killing people. They're killing children.
Oh yeah,
and no truck for that.
Yeah, I think if I ever wrote something on the consequences, or on like the concept that beliefs have consequences, it might be a rant about that kind of stuff. There's a church up in Pennsylvania, for instance, that has been linked to the deaths of around 24 children.
Right.
Can you believe that? 24.
Yeah, I've just popped a link in, and that's about. It's not really an anti-vax. It's not really an anti-vax post. It is in a sense, but there's this young kid from Mexico who put up a YouTube video going the evidence that vaccines cause autism. And he's going through this video, and he opens this folder. He says, "I've got in here all the evidence that vaccines cause autism." And I thought he was an anti-vaxxer, and I was getting ready to spit feathers. And you've got actually, I wonder if we can still find it. He did actually friend me on Facebook, which I didn't think was really entirely appropriate, but
I don't know. I've had a few. I've already gotten a few creationist followers on Twitter. A few of them not creationists, just like churches, which is weird. Why would they want what I'm saying popping up in their feed? I don't understand.
Yeah.
When I say something like belief in God is wrong, and they're like, oh yeah, good thing that shows up. So I don't get it.
Let me just have a look, because I think I may have put the video.
Oh, have you? We were talking about the geocentrists. Have you heard of a guy named Rick Delano?
Yes,
Oh,
I have. I came across him on the Richard Dawkins forum about 10 years ago.
you'll be delighted to know he's a friend of our good friend Charlie.
Yes. Yeah, I know him. I've interacted with him on the Richard Dawkins forum many years ago. Probably about a decade ago now, 2006 or somewhere thereabouts. Yeah, he's a cretin.
Yeah, we actually got into it, although he's a moron. I don't even remember. Oh, I made a post on Facebook, and that was the reason. What I said something about I don't understand why we have so many conspiracies in a world when you can look up at any time all the answers right at your fingertips. If you live in America or Europe, all the ways that these things are wrong, that geocentrism is wrong, anti-vaxxers, and so, and I mentioned creationism, and I think that drew Charlie's attention. So we linked Rick Delano in it, and I'd never heard of this guy before, and so he was like, "Oh, there's no evidence. There are no experiments that the Earth is orbiting the sun. I guess those darn satellites are part of the conspiracy. The conspiracy. What was it? What is it? Cool Hard Logic says the UN and NASA conspiracy, even though both were formed in like the 1940s and 50s.
Yeah.
And yet this conspiracy dates back to antiquity. And so
yeah. Eratosthenes in 245 BC.
Exactly. Yep. Of course, I don't know a whole lot about physics, but I went and I was looking up different experiments and things like that. And after I gave him several links, he said, "Oh, like you can't ever change minds once they believe something or something like that."
And I just thought, I've got no use for the term.
And I just thought, well, screw you too.
Yeah.
But that was
pure projection. I mean, that's they do love to throw that one around. I mean, I think you see a strain of apologetic arguments where they try to use our own statements against us. So we know, for example, that theirs is a faith-based position, so they try to paint ours as a faith-based position. And they're always trying to draw these symmetries between our position, which is evidentially supported, and theirs, which isn't. Where no such symmetry exists, it's a complete fabrication. But yeah, I can't remember what I was going to say. I'm clearly the drugs are wearing off now.
My goodness.
Anyway, it's getting quite late here.
Indeed, yeah.
I'm quite loud, and you've come from class, have you? And
yep. Fortunately, no more classes today. Got out of micro, and that was it.
Yeah. Oh, macro. That was the other thing that I'd meant to say something about, because I think that's one of the misconceptions that I would like to change in counter apologists, because people talk about macro as being just a lot of micro, and that's horribly, horribly misleading to my mind. They think that if you have lots of bits of microevolution, it leads to macroevolution, and in a sense that's true, but it's not the full picture. And macroevolution is an area of study, really. Studies things like shared alleles.
Macroevolution is a specific part of evolution. It's just genetic change at or above the level of species.
Yeah. So I talk about macroevolution being a field of, an area of study in which, for example, people are studying alleles that studying specific alleles that are shared between humans and chimps and how they vary. So each variation in those is a macroevolutionary variation, and they vary with every birth in just the same way that microevolutionary changes vary with every birth. So those alleles are varying all the time. And of course, there are other macroevolutionary events that don't take any time. Extinction is a macroevolutionary event, and that takes no time at all. It's an instantaneous thing. And if you get something like an extinction event in a partial extinction event in a ring species, that's a speciation event as well. And so that's macroevolution in both senses.
Yeah, ring species are kind of funny. I know Jerry Coyne doesn't like people using that phrase because he's like, if they're not perfect ring species, then they're not ring species. Even though I kind of take issue with that, I think maybe they're not. It's not continuous all the way around except for the endpoint, but a fair bit of it is continuous. A fair bit of the populations are continuous.
Well, I mean, for me, it doesn't. For me, I can understand where he's coming from, but for me, ring species is just a term, and it doesn't actually, for me, have to form a ring. It could be linear. You could have a linear population where, as long as there is gene flow from one end to the other by any means, because the intermediates can all interbreed, then that still constitutes a ring species, even if they don't meet up. If there's a species of lizard that say goes from the northern Andes to the southern Andes, or all down the length of Chile, that would still constitute a ring species. We only call it a ring species because we think of specific populations of them, like the entertainers
or the greenish warblers.
Yeah, indeed. And it's not even clear that the entertainers are a ring species, but it doesn't matter because the principle is still sound.
Or
I have a sneaking suspicion that dogs are a ring species.
Dogs? In what sense?
Yeah. Well, in that I would be fair. I mean, in some respects, you'd have to say, for example, that there is no natural set of circumstances in which a Chihuahua is going to have gene flow with a Great Dane. They're not going to interbreed naturally, and I know that, for example, in some of these populations, in some of these entertainer populations, there are little things like differences in temperature that will. So one of the mates, one of them will tend to mate at a given temperature. Another one will tend to mate at a different given temperature, but you can fool them both into mate. So they wouldn't normally mate because they have different temperatures that they mate at, but you can fool them into mating. So strictly speaking, they would be separate species, except that gene flow does exist between them as long as there are vectors for them for gene flow to occur. So you'd still call them the same species, but strictly they are still a ring species because they don't naturally mate. And there's enough diversity in dogs that I would say you couldn't really call them a single species. They're more like a ring species because there are lots of situations where you are not going to get gene flow between two dogs. It's simply not going to happen unless we intervene. So I have a sneaking suspicion that if we thought about it really carefully, we would probably define dogs as a ring species.
Yeah, and dogs are one of those, or common house dogs, one of those places where, are they Canis lupus familiaris or Canis familiaris?
Yeah,
depends on your taxonomist, I guess, or cladist.
Yeah, it depends whether you're a lumper or a splitter.
Yeah. True. So anyways, I guess we can end it here if you'd like.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. What?
That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming on today. I enjoyed it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching, and have a nice night.